People often say that everything that makes us human is behind the eyes, the windows to the soul. But what happens when there's no longer anything behind the eyes? Everything that makes us human is no longer visible. Well, I wouldn't want to meet that person, that's for sure.
So, antisocial personality disorder, or ASPD, as we'll refer to it as, is a personality disorder on a spectrum, so it's also a spectrum disorder. It's part of a cluster of personality disorders known as cluster B personality disorders, so that's narcissistic, histrionic, and borderline personality disorder. It affects me in a multitude of different ways, but the main ways it affects me, or the most prevalent symptoms that stand out in me, is probably like a low emotional wheel, lack of empathy, irritability with day-to-day life. It's resulted in me losing jobs a lot in the past and things like that, and just because I get really irritable and have sort of no forward thinking when I'm in that state. You know, it's sort of I don't think about the repercussions of my actions, or, you know, how my behaviour is going to affect, you know, how it's going to have a knock-on effect, essentially. So I've lost jobs in the past for those reasons. I've just left because I just don't care, you know, or I've got angry and I've just become aggressive and just thought, nah, you know, screw this, essentially, and just left jobs. It definitely affects my relationships, especially the forming of relationships is something I really struggle with. Because I have a low emotional sort of scope, I don't always understand social cues, and when someone's feeling upset, or, you know, it affects most sort of romantic relationships, that aspect, where if a partner's been feeling upset or, you know, angry, or sometimes I can't read it to the point where it looks like I'm ignoring them, which causes arguments, of course, or it has done in the past, or I simply don't care, so to speak. I just don't really, it doesn't register emotionally in my mind, so I find it really hard to connect with people as a result. Social situations as well. I don't really have that many friends, and I haven't had that many friends over the years for that reason. I find it hard to sort of connect with someone on a, you know, empathetic basis. Like, I've learned how empathy works, I've learned how people display it, and I've learned how to display it. There's been times where I've gone to parties, or when I'm about to go to a party, and I have a specific set of questions in my head that I'm going to ask people to come across as empathetic, or someone who's not like me, basically, someone who's average, normal. I can't remember the exact age, but when it's under the age of 18, they call it conduct disorder. Conduct disorder is what antisocial personality disorder can develop into. And when I say can, because it doesn't always, it actually rarely does, but, you know, it can do. I'd say nursery. I mean, my mum always used to tell me stories when I was in nursery, that I used to always be violent to the other kids, like knocking over their food and just being a general little shit, basically. And just being disruptive, and I've been excluded a few times as a kid for being, you know, violent and just sort of generally not a nice kid to the other kids, and that sort of developed into my primary school era. It was sort of the same. Struggled to make friends, was a little bit, didn't know when to stop doing things, you know, just didn't know when to stop teasing people, or, you know, being a little bit aggressive. and then it sort of dwindled, like the impulsive, not knowing when to stop doing things like that, sort of dwindled as I went into my high school period, like my secondary school. I was a little bit easier at containing the impulses, so to speak. I started to develop like anxiety and things like that as I grew up. So anxious of because obviously I was the quote unquote aggressor when I was younger. I was the mischievous one. I was the one causing problems. But then as I grew up, you obviously meet people who are sort of worse off, or a bigger fish, so to speak. And then sort of because of my childhood of sort of being exposed to aggression as a child, that sort of made me react in a different way towards aggression as I grew up. So I sort of tried to almost steer away from it. You know what I mean? Tried to suppress it when I got into like my secondary school stages, because I wanted to attempt to make new friends at that point. I thought, I need to try and fit in a little bit more now, become a little bit more conscious of it. Obviously, when you're a kid, your inhibitions are like non-existent, but as you grow up, you start to develop sort of more fears and insecurity. Like I said, I wanted to sort of fit in a little bit more and develop relationships, so I kept it. It was easy to keep at bay at that point. Aggression being a fairly big part of ASPD, the antisocial, being against society. That's sort of a big thing that I've always struggled with. I've always struggled with violent thoughts and intrusive thoughts. When I was younger, I used to act on those thoughts. Like I mentioned earlier, I didn't have as much inhibition when it comes to things like that, so I used to act on those things. I can remember one of the first times, like vividly remember one of the first times when I was younger. Probably, I can't really pinpoint an age, but when I used to, live back at home with my mum when I was, significantly younger, and I used to play out on the street with like two or three other kids who I played out with on the street. I vividly remember every time we used to play on bikes, and every time they was on the bikes, I'd always get the urge to push them off or trip them up, that kind of stuff, which happened at school as well. I got the urge to trip people up and just, seemingly minor things like that. But yeah, I remember one time I acted on one of those urges as a kid when there was somebody who I was playing with who was on the bike, and I sort of had like a stick in my hand, and I just got the urge to chuck the stick in between the spokes of his bike, and I just did it, didn't think, I just did it, and he fell off his bike and hurt himself quite badly, like there was some cuts on his face and his legs and things like that, and obviously his parents were annoyed, but I just remember finding it really enjoyable and really fun at the time. Like it's like a little joke, like it was sort of mischievous, but it was sort of a precursor of things to come as I grew up. So as I said previously, when I first started having those thoughts, well, I assumed they were normal thoughts. I assumed that everybody thought like that. It was normal to think like that. Obviously, when I was a kid, I didn't know any different. I didn't experience anything different to flag anything up in my mind, say anything was wrong at this point. So I didn't really feel anything towards it. I enjoyed it. I found it funny. I used to do a lot of things like that as a kid, like, again, seemingly normal things which you hear a lot of other people talk about in their childhood, playing pranks on people. I just took it too far, I think, looking back on it now, obviously, as an adult. I just like throwing rocks at people's windows and stuff, and I lived in like an old area, as in it was predominantly older people in the area that I lived in. Sort of a bit of a terror in the neighbourhood, just like throwing pebbles at people's windows and running away and finding it really funny. Like everyone used to play at knock a door run as a kid, but I think I just took it a little bit too far. But at the time I didn't realise it was an issue. I just thought it was, oh, everyone's doing it, everyone does that. It developed over the years, it developed into slightly more dark territory in terms of like how I viewed it, and the thoughts that developed became a little bit more friendly, so as I matured and grew up, so did the thoughts. They became more mature in nature. A lot of the violent thoughts came from aggression. They were angry thoughts, so angry, it was like a rage. I felt a lot of rage at times. Again, that goes back to the environment I grew up in. I grew up in a turbulent childhood, so a lot of it came from that, just feeling angry and wanting to take it out on everybody. All this stemmed from a pretty violent childhood. So to cut a very, very long story, to put it into context, so my biological father was, he abused us all. And I say all, my family that I lived with, which was my mum and my two brothers. He abused us all. He was violent, physically violent, emotionally violent, sexually violent, eventually, to a member of my family, which he eventually got imprisoned for, but only served 2 years. But that's another problem. That's another issue. But yeah, so he was extremely violent in every way possible. So I used to basically, my childhood consisted of watching him attack my family and me, like beat us up. My mum, like that was like almost a daily occurrence, which obviously fucks a kid up. Obviously, like it's a bit cliche, but it's true. It messes a kid up. So, and then when I moved over to Rotherham, South Yorkshire, in like 2009, just before I started year 9, and I didn't have a great relationship with my stepfather at the time, or my mum. We were very distant, so I ended up becoming homeless at 16, living in a homeless hostel in the middle of Rotherham, and then eventually getting involved with the wrong people didn't really help. So it all sort of interlinks with each other, like abusive childhood, not great school years, teenage years, didn't have many friends, was teased and picked on quite a lot at school, especially when I moved over to Rotherham, and which made things boil over, made things 10 times worse. So yeah, it just went sort of from bad to worse. So when I say childhood, that's what I mean, like without giving all the grisly details, it was just an all-round abusive place to be involved in, so that's what I mean.